The Budget Committee is back in session. Thank you very much. We have with us now Emergency Communications, led by Cheryl Bledsaw, the director, and you have some folks with you. I'll let you introduce those, Cheryl. Thank you. So you have about 45 minutes, and what we're trying to do is sort of a 50-50 type of thing, with half of it on your presentation and half of it in questions and answers from the commission or from the committee. So thank you for that today.
Thanks to all the members of the Budget Committee for having us today. My name is Cheryl Bledsoe, and I'm the Executive Director for ClackCo 911, which provides your 911 call taking and your emergency dispatch police and fire agencies here in Clackamas County. To my left is Meg Gilliland, and she is our executive assistant who has been instrumental in working with us on the budget, as well as our Performance Clackamas Managing for Results. To my right is Tony Collins, and he is my 911 operations manager, and he is here to answer any of the operational questions that you might have about today's budget. So with that, we can advance the slides, I believe. So Clackamas County 911 is your 911 call answering service. We are open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And we take a lot of emergency and non-emergency calls for the residents and folks who are in the boundaries of Clackamas County. This past year, we took about 280,000 calls for service. Half of those were 911 calls and half of those were non-emergency calls. So about 140,000 in both categories. We provide dispatching services for 6 different law enforcement entities and 8 different fire service districts within the borders of Clackamas County. And we also work with several different ambulance providers, including Canby, Malala, and American Medical Response. If you could advance the slide to budget 3. CCOM's budget is a little bit unique because we are outside of the general fund. We are funded through a combination of state 911 tax. There is a 75-cent tax that is on everyone's phone system for both landline phones and for cell and wireless type calls. And that 75-cent tax goes down to the state of Oregon, and then they provide Clackamas County with a certain percentage of funding for our budget. So each year, this last year, we received about $1.6 million in funds from the 911 tax. That only funds about 17 or 18% of my budget, and the rest is split between our law and our fire service agencies. So our law enforcement agencies take the rest of that budget, 84%, and they pay 65% of that 84%, and our fire agencies pay about 35%. And that is distributed based on the call volume and the workload that is associated between our law enforcement agencies and our fire agencies. So on budget slide 3, you'll see that our department budget request looks like it's gone down by about 1.6%. But that's not actually true if you look at my year-by-year budget, because I have a member board of my police and fire agencies, and they review our budget every year. And due to a supplemental appropriation in the middle of last year for some grant funds, it took my budget up to $10 million, even though it was initially $9.1 million in the initial budget request. So for 2019 and 2020, my member board actually approved an increase of 8.95% to my budget in order to provide us 2 additional 911 call takers. And so overall, if I compare the 2 budget years, last year, 2018-19, and 2019-20, my budget has actually gone up 9%. And that is simply, it's a very personnel-heavy budget. And so 2 additional staff into our budget results in that 9% increase. So in February of this year, my member board approved that budget, and that is the budget that we are bringing before you today. And so our goal, our CCOM as an agency has always been historically very understaffed for the call volume that we have. We actually have just recently completed a study called the Project Retain study that helps us evaluate how many call takers and dispatchers that we should have as an organization. And we are still short of the overall goal for the number of call takers and dispatchers that we should have for our residents here in Clackamas County. I don't know if you want to take questions before.
Do that after you finish your that way you can get through your presentation. What folks do ask, if there's a clarifying question, they will ask that. Otherwise, we'll wait until you've completed your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. If you could advance the slide. So in terms of the budget reduction slide, our budget does not illustrate any reductions because we don't receive any general fund support. So no specific reductions were made to our overall budget. Could advance the slide. I do want to speak to the 4 basic goals that are in our Performance Clackamas, our strategic plan. And goal number 1 of our strategic plan is to achieve full staffing. As I mentioned, staffing has been historically short here with Clackamas County. And this past year, we experienced a transition in leadership. I just recently became the director in September of 2018, and we had a number of vacant positions within our organization. In fiscal year 2018 and 19, CCOM has completed 20 recruitments. That is a historic high for the number of people that we have recruited into our organization. We achieved full staffing of our technical team and now have 5 people in our technical program. Our administrative and management team is complete, and we have 13 employees or 12 employees in the training process. Your slides say 13, but one has just recently gotten off trainee status, so we have 12 trainees currently in the process. Additionally, we have 3 more recruitments that are currently in process where we will hire an additional 2 dispatchers, 3 call takers, and a quality assurance coordinator, which are presently already budgeted within the confines of our budget. Like I mentioned, we just completed the Project Retain study, and if we were to look at the actual call volume that we have here in Clackamas County, plus our radio traffic, it actually recommends that we have 51 dispatchers and call takers within Clackamas County. So it would take another 9 full-time FTE in order to achieve sufficient staffing for a county of this size. So that is a recommendation that we are actually taking to our member board in this coming month, and they will evaluate over the next couple of years. For the past 4 years, our member board has been tremendously supportive, and they have supported 2 additional staff every year over the last 4 years to increase our staffing to get us to more proportionate to where we should be. So this is a conversation that we have regularly with that member board, and this Project Retain study will help give us the data that we need to really talk about when we will achieve full staffing. Next slide. The other key performance measures, so one of our other goals in our Performance Clackamas is to improve the customer experience both for residents and for user agencies. And to that end, this past year, we have improved our internal communication inside our organization through the use of weekly director updates as well as development of an internal intranet page so that we can minimize our reliance on email within the organization. As you can imagine, in a 911 dispatch agency, it's almost impossible to sit down and read your email. You come to work, you begin taking 911 calls, and you begin dispatching very significant emergency responses. And so it's been really important for our organization, for our employees to be able to sit down and to feel confident that they know what has changed and what is new in their position. And so the other thing that we've done is we've really aimed to enhance our user engagement with our law and our fire users. We used to meet with them on a quarterly basis to talk about operational issues and problems within the organization. We have now changed that meeting rhythm to monthly. So we now meet with our law and fire users on a monthly basis to talk about operational changes and how to address our service delivery questions. We're also beginning to dig into the call and the dispatch times in order to evaluate our systems, in order to look about how to improve our call response times, as well as to establish a quality assurance and quality improvement plan to ensure that we're providing the best customer service for our residents and citizens in Clackamas County. And to that end, we're also reviewing all of our policies and our procedures within the organization and deploying a technology the Sheriff's Office already uses called Power DMS to make sure that we have accountability for the policies and the procedures that we have created within our organization. And finally, we've deployed a technical help desk so that we can ensure that all of the technical problems that our customers experience, that we're able to make sure that we track up and follow those. Previously, they've been reported to us on an email basis, and now we have a technical help desk that helps us track the completion of those issues. You can advance the slide to the emerging trends and issues. There are 3 basic issues that are facing our budget for the coming years that I wanted to chat with you about today. The first is that the CCOM facility is really inadequately sized to meet the call volume and staffing needs. So as I mentioned earlier, that our Project Retain study recommends that we have 50, 51, 52 dispatchers within our organization, and our current number of actual workstations doesn't meet that. And so there will become a point in our budget where we will have to tell our member board that we really can't take on additional call takers and dispatchers because we have no space or no place to put them in order to take emergency calls. The second big pressure on our budget is that there's been a shift at the state level to transition some of the technology burden from the state level to the local level. Some of the technology that supports us in 911, like our phone systems and some of the mapping support that we receive, as well as support for our universal power supplies, sits in a fund at the Oregon Emergency Management Office that is currently fiscally unstable. And so there has been a move statewide to move some of the costs for that to shifting those burdens to the local level. And so they've already told us that of the 14 positions that I have today, only 11 will be funded in the future, meaning that I will have a local burden to pay for those 3 dispatch consoles or call-taking consoles for the future. What we did learn today, however, is that House Bill 2449 down in the Oregon State Legislature, which recommends an increase of the 911 tax, has moved out of the Revenue Committee onto the floor of the House. And so we may see a 25-cent increase. That tax right now is 75 cents. And the proposal on the floor right now is to increase that tax by 25 cents in the next year and 25 cents in the year following. That could yield us up to an additional $1 million in revenue potentially if it passes. But of course, no guarantees that that passes. Regardless, that shifting burden from state to local level we anticipate to continue and will be something that we will have to deal with in the future. The third thing that we have to deal with is that next generation 911 already is expected by the general public. So for anyone that uses a smartphone or a cell phone, there's an expectation that video and pictures are able to come to my 911 dispatch agency. And unfortunately today, that information cannot come into my center. And part of it is because the carriers themselves don't route that information to a place that it can get to the right 911 agency. But the technology that's associated with pictures and videos is far more significant in terms of storage, in terms of memory, in terms of operational and public records laws, that we have yet to figure out the types of technology that will be needed to support that type of technology. But what we do know is we know with every technology, it's expensive. And so we anticipate that the burdens that will be needed to accommodate next generation 911 to accommodate picture and image detail will be more expensive as we go into the future. Right now, I don't have any timelines of when that type of stuff will come to us, but we anticipate the public already expects us to be able to do it. And we have transitioned to taking text to 911, but right now we just receive only the text message, which is a very short character count compared to some of the pictures and the images that folks wish they could share with us. So those are the 3 pressures that support my budget. As I mentioned, my member board already approved the increase in the budget, and so they are willing to support the increase in the user costs that are associated with the 2 additional FTE in my budget. But with that, I'm open to any questions that you might have.
Great, thank you very much. Commissioner Humberson and then Commissioner Bernard.
So you had a 9% increase in the budget that was approved by your board, but I thought I caught that was as a result of some grant funds that you received?
No, that the 10 million that illustrates in last year's budget, it looks like my budget was 10 million. That's because we received some middle of the year grant funds for a regional project that made my budget
Separate
look like 10 million. So it looks like a decrease on your information.
The increase in your budget is not directly related to financing staff positions.
It is. The 9% increase is directly related to funding 2 positions in my budget.
Okay, but the grant money is for something else?
Grant funding was related to a cybersecurity project.
Okay.
That's an assessment that we're doing of all the 911 centers
So
in the region.
I'm assuming then that your partners will be absorbing that 9% in terms of paying that to you to pay for those positions.
The law and the fire users are paying those 2
Because my question, if I was connecting it to the grant, and I was concerned that that wouldn't be sustainable.
Right.
And you answered the question about facilities, so I don't need to ask that. There was one other. Oh, where do you get your recruits from?
That's a very good question. So in order to be a 911 call taker or a dispatcher, we get our recruits from all over the place. Traditionally, our most successful recruits have been out of the banking industry as well as the coffee shop industry, because those are 2 services that require a high amount of multitasking as well as an amount of confidentiality and an amount of operating quickly. So it only requires a high school, a GED or diploma in order to apply to be a dispatcher, and we are constantly recruiting. One thing that we find in the 911 industry is that it does come with a fair amount of post-traumatic stress disorder. It is something that you cannot be in this field and not be affected by some of the things that you hear and some of the things that you see. So some of the things that we see is sometimes our recruits tend to scale initially into our organization at a younger age because they don't have the amount of history that folks who may have a fair amount of history in their background or post-traumatic stress
In
from
other
other
words,
reasons.
young people versus old people?
Sort of. I don't know what the HR appropriate way to say that is. But it's one of those professions that we just know that we will be giving people an amount of post-traumatic stress, which is unfortunate because of the types of things that they hear on the phone and the types of stories that they never get to hear the answer to or the ending to. For the most part, you only hear the end of the story if it's bad in our profession.
It's interesting. So how does that affect your budget?
In terms of turnover, so
In any way?
So in order to become a call taker or a dispatcher, it takes a fair amount of training. In fact, to be a full-fledged 911 dispatcher, it takes anywhere from 18 to 24 months. It takes us about 6 months to train a call taker, and then it takes another 6 months to learn fire dispatching, another year almost to learn law dispatching, because the important thing is you have to learn a little bit about the geography and a little bit about the laws in all of the areas in which we serve. It's not just you come into one organization and you know it all within 1 year. So it takes, of the people that we see in the recruiting process, very few people make it through the multitasking tests that we require in order to be qualified. And then some people come into the profession and self-select out. So for every 2 folks that we get into the recruiting process, one person will likely quit on their own and another person will or won't make it through the training process. So those numbers are pretty across the board difficult from recruiting. So we are always recruiting. We often recruit 3 or 4 times a year. Like I said, we did 20 recruitments. That's a high for us this year in terms of doing that many recruitments at once. It is phenomenal if you walk through my dispatch center right now to see 12 call takers sitting with coaches, because the way they learn is they sit with a coach. So they're working on a console to learn the dispatching process. So we anticipate that there is about 5 people who turn over every year, whether or not it's due to retirement or due to career changes. We don't see a lot of people leave the profession to go to other 911 agencies because the amount of the volume of things that you need to learn is so incredible. So oftentimes if folks make it through training, they will often be a long-term employee for us for 20 to 30 years. And then the only question comes at what age or what part of their career do they feel they can no longer handle the multitasking, or they've dealt with enough stress that it's time for them to move on to something else altogether. And so a lot of times we will see people either retire or move on to a completely different career field simply to get out of the stressful environment that they work in day to day.
I think you should contact Public and Government Affairs and have much of what you just told us here in some sort of a publication, one of our publications. People need to understand really what that job is, what it takes to, the amount of time it takes, and consequently the amount of money that it takes to train a dispatcher. We're always trying to explain to the general public why things cost so much. And it's not always easy to do.
Sure.
But that's a perfect example of, and the Sheriff's Department, who has about an 18-month training regimen also. I mean, those are perfect examples of things that the public needs to hear, and we have a perfectly good publication to do that. So I'd like to suggest that you do that, and thank you for your answers.
Of course, thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Bernard.
So mine are mainly comments. One thing is that I've been here 10 years. Back in 2003, I ran for the commission and lost. But on the road, there were lots of people who talked about staffing of the 911. So it's been a long time coming. I also got to say that you said increasing communications. In the 10 years I've been here, when Ken and I visited you, I learned more than I'd ever learned. So I recommend that everybody have an opportunity to go by 911.
Visit the cave.
Visit the cave, talk to the employees.
I heard that's what it is.
They do an amazing job, and sometimes a very painful work, and you've really got to understand that. And the other thing is that I'm hoping that when we do a courthouse, we will consider putting a facility in there that would accommodate your needs. Since we do charge rent, there would be an opportunity to for your board to provide some funding for that. And there are also great people to have out campaigning for stuff. So in the survey we did, it indicated that including a 911 facility in there would be a good idea. So I'm hoping that when we get down the nitty-gritty, that is one of the things we'll consider. But again, thank you for your communication, and thank you for the information you provide. And I mean, when you can put 20 people, which is historic for Clackamas County, that says something about the department. So thank you very much.
I see no other questions at the moment or comments. So I thank you very much for being here today. We definitely appreciate hearing what you're doing. I certainly personally appreciate hearing more about what it takes to become a 911 operator. I guess I won't be doing that. So,
You still could.
as you all know, my stress level is, yeah, I'd be crying on the phone all the time with those people. I couldn't handle, it'd be like, that would almost be as bad as me working at the Humane Society. Couldn't do that either,
We
so.
talked about baristas, and I have a hard time with the coffee pot, so.
I thought that was interesting. They come from banking or they come from coffee shops, so.
So can you give us the multitasking test? I'm kind of curious
Yeah,
to see
could
if
we
the
do it?
ADHD will help.
You should say
how's
that.
that
I actually just signed up to take the test myself
Oh, you
today.
did? Okay.
So these guys are,
I'd love to take it.
we do a typing test, and then we also do two different tests in order to evaluate.
could
One of the
I failed typing, yeah. I'm not type, but I might.
one of the
try.
things
could
that's
do that.
important to know
Ask
is
that one.
I've got 6 screens and 7 screens in front of most dispatchers, and I'm also asking them to tap the radio with their feet and listen to the phone in one ear and the radio in another ear. So I'm literally using almost every, and their hands to type. So
That
I'm literally using almost every
sounds
appendage they
smart.
have in order to answer and respond to 911 calls. So it's phenomenal work they do, and I'm super proud of all of our team members that are involved.
So did you guys watch that new TV program
Yeah,
called
we live
9/11?
tweeted it actually.
Called 9/11?
911, yeah.
It's like, oh my gosh, I am just in this high state all the time when I'm watching it. I'm like, get there. Yeah. Oh, you guys got to see it. Yeah. I get affected easily. Thanks again. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Oh, I'm sorry. Ms. Coldwell has a comment.
Thank you. Mr. Feely, who could not be here this afternoon,
yeah.
asked me to ask a question on his behalf. Apparently something that he's been asking every year, and hoping that we're getting refinement on the key results measures. And his question has to do with emergency response time. I see that you've got some here for call answering and call dispatching, but is there any information available from the time a call is received to when they actually get somebody at the door?
Yes. And in fact, we just recently, I was just in a meeting just before this one, looking at those very specific statistics about from the time we take a call to the time that we dispatch a call. And so we are, or the time that the call is assigned or given to a first responders. That
When they actually arrive at the
when they
doorway.
arrive at the call, yes.
So it's multi-agency is kind of the question. but
Yes.
I don't
And-
know if there was any information like that available.
We are working currently with our EMS council, our Emergency Medical Service Council, and working with them to develop a quality assurance and quality improvement program that will evaluate every part of the process from the time the call is taken to the patient is transported to the hospital. And so, in fact, Tony and I are just scheduled to go to a meeting on their subcommittee on Monday because they are looking at the full across-the-board spectrum with our fire agencies to evaluate how we're doing in that regard. Also, in addition to that, our CPR statistics just came out recently, and for Clackamas County, we saw a tremendous increase in the number of CPR saves that were just shared by, I believe, PGA and the Public Health just put out the press release on that. So we're seeing a tremendous increase in the number of CPR saves that we're able to provide for the community, much higher than the state average.
So when you get that information, could we get that sent to the budget committee members?
So maybe so I can clarify, is he asking for a year's worth of that data or a month's?
I think
or
it's just, I think it's just the stats on response time. That full
So my agency
Multi-agency.
we can provide the response times from the time the call is given to the time that it's dispatched.
They
We'll
wouldn't
have to
know.
involve a number of different agencies to do the
Yeah.
full
And I
across the
thought you
board.
said you were working on something along those lines.
Public health, and we would have to connect with Philip in our public health
Okay.
department. I know
So it's
they
not
just,
something you're already doing?
it's not something I don't collect. I collect part of it. I'm part of that chain of data. But I know that the public health just recently signed a contract. They had lost a staffing position recently and have just hired a new person in order to be the keepers of that data. And I know that contractor is just now coming on board, but I'd be happy to put you in contact with Philip, who is working with the EMS Council on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And the EMS council is a good place to go because, you know, with the contract for ambulance services, we have a time frame and they
Yes.
keep really strict records of when they arrive, how long they're there, and their zones and all that stuff to be considered too.
That's
So
good to know, too. Ms. Fish?
So, you may have answered these questions already or whatnot earlier, and I might just not be remembering. But I did note that your ending fund balance is projected to be spent, or your beginning fund balance is projected to be spent down quite a bit, going from like last year it was budgeted to be 991,000. You're projected to be at 1.2, but you're budgeting to be at only 200,000. Is that due to some sort of capital project or something? Or should you be increasing rates, or are you concerned about that level of fund balance?
So let me just consult one thing. So one of the things that we were told in this budgeting process was that we could not estimate that the real ending fund balance until June or July. But the numbers that are in the county system, I think, are different than the numbers that we estimated for our member board. So that's why I'm pulling this out. The fund balance that we are estimating for 2019-20 is 1.2 million, 1,225,487. So there's
As the beginning balance, but when you look at your budget, you're projecting to only have 200,000 at the end of the year. Or you're proposing to budget.
I might not be understanding your question. So every year that we do a budget, and there's two different budgets that are sort of my member board budget and then the budget we do for you guys. We always sweep the end of the year balance into the next projected budget. And so that comes off the top of what our users pay. We only usually maintain 200,000, which is our contingency at the end of the day, which gets swept into the contingency fund. So I think that is what you are asking, because we would project that the remainder, we also project will be at fuller staffing, which is going to take down, the reason we've had 1.2 million in the past is because we've had endemic short staffing, but now that we are actually going to be having people in those positions, we actually estimate that money will be spent down more significantly.
So are your members aware that rates will go up if
Yeah.
you don't have that carryover?
They are very aware. I mean, we've been talking about them at each of our member board meetings, and that was one of the risks that when we posed this budget, because when we initially did the scoping on this budget, we thought we were going to be at about 800,000 in carryover instead of the 1.6 million that we had in the year previous, and that caused their rates to go up to 17-18% even without additional FTE. So we are very cognizant of the fact that as we become full staffed and that carryover goes down, that their rates will artificially go up without any increase in service, simply to make up for that carry forward. So we have been in those conversations. They are aware it's coming. We're trying to stage it in such a way that there's 6% increases as opposed to very significant jumps like 17 or 18%. And that is an additional discussion we'll have if House Bill 2449 passes about how to sort of get off the addiction of the carry forward that we've had from previous years.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I appreciate that additional discussion. That helped clarify some other points. So once again, thank you
Thank you.
for being here, and we appreciate your
Thank you for having us.
attention
Thanks
to the budget detail.
to all of
Thank
you for
you.
your service.
Thank you.